Greetings, friends and fellow freelancers. Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Mercenary, where I do my best to pull back the curtain and tell everybody what's going on in the TTRPG industry. This week, I wanted to talk about a topic that's been rather contentious over the past year and change, and to really get down to the nitty-gritty and explain to people how you can get good art without victimizing anyone or stealing it from anywhere. And that's not going to be as difficult as some folks think, and more importantly, it's not going to require you to have a gigantic budget. If you have one, that's great. But if you are like a lot of us here who are working on a bit of a shoestring, I have some solutions for how you can actually get out there and get images in your product that will get people to pay attention. Because while we say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, we all know that art is one of the most eye-catching parts of any RPG, and if you don't have good art, or if you have art that's just ho-hum or so-so, people are going to have a much harder time picking up your game and actually getting into it. So, without further ado, let's get to the first way you can get art for your game. We'll start with commissions. I'm going to be going in order of most expensive to least expensive for this particular list. Even if you manage to find an artist who is starting out or who has very low rates, commissioning particular art for your game is going to be the most expensive way to do it. That doesn't mean it's not good for you. It doesn't mean it's not going to give you a good result. It just means that this is going to require a higher than average budget. You should keep that in mind when you start going this route. Now, there are both pros and cons to commissioning, which I'll get into here in a moment. The obvious benefit is that if you commission an artist to make art for your game, this is not art that other games are going to have. You are going to have unique work done by a unique artist, and while they may have done work for other games and their style may be familiar, these art pieces will be unique to your game. And that is something that cannot be overstated. For example, those who saw my unboxing for Army Men, Anonymous Katsudon, did amazing work for my game book. And the style and the unique appearance of my game world was very firmly captured, and it is very unique and very eye-catching. And that's not something we were going to get with any of the methods that we have in the following sections. At the same time, it is even saying that we get a very reasonable rate and she works at a cost point that is not unfeasible for a lot of RPG companies. Commissioning is going to cost you, and that's why if you're going to commission an artist to make work specifically for your game, it is important to set aside the cost for it. Now, with that said, you don't have to commission every single piece of art in your game if you choose to go this route. For example, lots of people just commission cover art because that's the most obvious and most eye-catching piece of most RPG books. It's going to be the first thing people see when they're walking by your booth at a convention or when they're scrolling through DriveThruRPG and they're wondering whether or not they should get your book. At the same time, though, you can also commission different artists. You can get different styles. You can get different people with different rates who have different visions, is probably a good way to phrase it. If you look through most RPG books, unless they come from a very large publisher, you're going to see different artists with different styles throughout the books, and especially if they have supplements and follow-ups, you're going to have different artists working on different things. This is also a good way for you to diversify where you're getting your art from so that it doesn't take forever waiting for one artist to do everything. Again, with Army Men, we got very lucky. We had our Kickstarter and we had our funding and we had time for our artists to do the big important pieces. But if we had been on deadline and we'd say needed to have this out a month or two rather than a year, we probably would have had to reach out to more artists, or we would have had to start way earlier in the process. Which is also something important to think about if you're going to go the commission route. Not only is it going to be more expensive, you're going to have to give the artist time to actually produce the work. Even artists who work very quickly will not give you the best work if you have them under the gun on a very tight deadline. So make sure that you give the people you're working with plenty of time to get you what you want, what you're paying for. Now, when it comes to commissioning artists, particularly for RPGs, you have a lot of different places you can go. There are large places on social media that are explicitly for artists to show off their portfolio and to just let people know this is what I am capable of, get a hold of me. Lots of the times they'll have either D&D commissions, for example, is a subreddit that I've scrolled through from time to time just because I like looking at the art and I like seeing who's available. But if you're on Facebook, if you're in part of any RPG communities, groups, etc., you can just put out a call. Artists will come find you. I guarantee it. The bigger problem you're going to have is actually going through all the entries and finding people that you like. It is also important to ask around, find people who've worked with particular artists before if you can, and see what their experience has been like. Was this artist pleasant to work with? Did they deliver on time? Or did they have a lot of delays? Did they have a lot of issues? Was it difficult getting them to give you sketches? Did you have to argue back and forth over concepts? It's just like working with anyone else for an RPG. You need to kind of take the temperature via the community. Make sure that you know who it is you're working with and that you trust the opinion you're getting from folks who are giving you the review. With that said, if this is something you're planning on doing for the long haul, this is a strategy you want to use going forward, generally speaking, you're going to end up with a stable of artists that you've met and that you've worked with and that you like both their product and you enjoy working with them as a fellow creator. That takes time to establish that kind of relationship, but it can be done. Also, lastly, and this is the strategy that I personally used for the art I have commissioned for those who really enjoy my logo, if you go to conventions at all, whether it's gaming conventions, anime conventions, whatever it is, there's going to be an artist alley, or there's going to be an art show. One of those two things is almost always present. When that happens, find it and look through all the artists there, grab their cards, talk to them, ask if they're open for commissions if you like their work. If you see something that's really neat, ask what it would be to use that for a product of yours. And that is probably the best way to meet someone and to figure out whether or not you could be business partners with them. Are they easy to talk to in person? Do they respond well? These are all very good things to have and to know before you start talking hard numbers. But that is the most expensive way to do this. There is a middle ground, though, for those who don't have as big a budget or who aren't certain this is quite the route they want to go with their product. And that is now, the second option that you have, and this is one that a lot of individuals end up using, is to use stock art. Now, for folks who've never heard the term before, stock art is essentially art that an artist will create and that they will sell over and over and over again, essentially letting people who pay the fee use it for their various projects and what they want to do. And an artist will typically have a list of things that their stock art can be used for and a list of things that it cannot be used for. For example, some people might say that their art is fine to use as book covers or is fine to use as interior art, but it is not okay to use on other types of merch. So you can't put their art on t-shirts, you can't put their art on dice rollers, things like that. And that's just going to come down to the individual artist and the rights associated with said stock art. Generally speaking, because artists have already created the stock art, they will allow it to be used at a much lower rate than something that they would have to be freshly commissioned for that would then have to be created. For folks who are looking for an example of my cover art for Crier's Knife, which hopefully I will have correctly put in post, uses the image Standing Stones by JH Illustrations, which you can find on DriveThruRPG. When I purchased this piece of stock art along with the rights to use it as my book cover, it cost me about $5. And it is a great piece of art. It is very eye-catching. It's gotten a lot of people to stop and immediately look at my book. And that is not something I could have afforded to commission if I wanted to be the only one to use it. This does, however, get us into the inherent drawback that comes with a lot of stock art is the more popular a piece of stock art happens to be, the more likely you are to run into it in the wild. For example, there are several book covers that I have seen that while the art is amazing and it looks really good, you can have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen people all using that same book cover, And so it's not until you get up close and actually read the title that you realize this is not the book you thought it was. This is significantly less of an issue with interior art, because by the time someone has picked up your book and is flipping through it, the interior art is meant essentially as a side dish of it's useful, you want it to be there, it's very helpful, but it's not going to be the main thing at that point. Yeah, at this point, people are like looking at the text and they're trying to get a sense of the game. The cover art is really what sucks them in. And this can be a bit of an issue. For example, if anyone has seen the game Godbound, it has very eye-catching art. It is very, very lovely. But as you can see with my cover over here for Ironfire, that is one of the pieces taken from Godbound's art pack, because when Sin Nomine put out said art pack, they basically made it free for any creator to use, as per stock art rules. You still have to give credit to the artists, and you have to list it in your book's credits and whatnot. But you can use the art free of charge. You didn't have to buy it. And there are a lot of people who have seen that cover, and particularly the cover for Maud, and they immediately assume that the products in question are meant to work with Godbound and that they're not part of another setting entirely. And this can be an issue that you should keep in mind when you use stock art of check around. Make sure you don't have a bunch of other people using the same image you want to use for your book that have vastly differing games. Because even if the art is really great, even if it's really evocative, you are going to be fighting that uphill battle, telling people, no, this has nothing to do with X, Y, or Z system that also happens to use this art. It's just that both of us are on the same kind of budget, and this is what both of us could afford, particularly if the art happens to have been free, as we saw with Godbound Pack. And that is, at the end of the day, going to end up being a choice you have to make of, is the art, is your style good enough, or is it separate enough from what's, the artist typically associated with? Is it enough to stand out from everybody else, who's using that art for their products? And that's really going to come down to a personal decision of, sometimes you just need something really cool, really eye-catching. Sometimes you want this to be a flagship product. You want this to be something that people are really going to grab hold of and that they're going to associate with you specifically. As a good example, the cover for Army Men is very different from the interior artwork, as folks who watched the unboxing saw. And that was part of the idea. We wanted the cover to look like an old military training manual. And so that was kind of the image we were going for. And it's really it's up to you. You need to know what kind of impression you want. And stock art is phenomenal for helping you grasp that, for helping you capture that without breaking your bank. It is very affordable, even if you are on a very, very limited budget and you only have so many funds to throw around. With that said, there's one other thing I would recommend folks who are planning on using this option for their game consider, and that's that since stock art already exists, you can't go to an artist and ask them to create a new piece of stock art. That's commissioning. But because of that, it's important to have your art in mind before you get too far along in the process. As a good example, folks who may have seen the module that I wrote, The Price of Iron. I wrote that module based on the artwork that the publisher was already planning on using. So we knew before I started, we had art for it. We already had it paid for, it was in the archive, we could just take it and use it. While that may not be quite necessary, it is a good idea to at least scroll around and check and see what kind of art you're planning on using, because there are a few things more frustrating than getting your project done and being ready to go and getting to the art phase, and then scrolling for hours and hours and hours and hours trying to find a piece of stock art that fits what you've made, and realizing there may not be anything that's quite like what you want. So while writing to your art is not always necessary, sometimes it is a really good idea, especially if you're at the starting point of the piece you're working on. Acquire the art first and work the rest of the RPG supplement or book around it, rather than doing the entire thing and keeping your fingers crossed that you can find some stock art that's really going to suit it going forward. Now, that's 2 of our 3 sections. As to the third. The last option that I recommend, and this is one that I personally use the most, is to search out royalty-free images and to just use those in your products. Now, for folks who are wondering what that is, a royalty-free image is just what it says in the title of it. Is an image that the artist has created and they have put out, usually on a website or on an archive somewhere, and it comes with a legal agreement saying you are free to use this as you wish. And it's extraordinarily useful, but it can be tough to find places to get that art that really suit your style, and it can be a lot of searching. For example, folks who are wondering, I recommend checking out Pixabay, Pixabay.com, and Pexels, Pexels.com. Those are the two main places that I go to, and they are, generally speaking, pretty good. You can search by photograph, you can search by illustration, you can put in your keywords, and as long as your Google Foo is up to date, you can usually find something that's going to suit. However, with that said, it's also a total crapshoot using royalty-free images. Sometimes you can find exactly what you're looking for really quickly. Sometimes you have to search around for a while, and sometimes there really isn't anything that suits what it is you need for this particular project. The upside, of course, is it's free, so you don't have to worry about that. What I recommend, if you're going to use this option, is that you sit down and you get some websites that you feel really comfortable using, and you just go through the archives and you find images that really speak to you and that are going to work for your projects. This is an advantage that I have at this point because I've been using these websites and a couple other royalty-free image archives for my blog. I've been using them for several of the videos that I make on here. And because of that, I've built up my own archive of these are the images that I like and that I use regularly and that sort of fit with what I'm doing. So when I have a new idea for something, whether it's I need a catchy image for a video, or I need something for this particular character, or I need something in my blog for this week that really fits the theme I'm going for, oftentimes I already have something just sitting there ready to be used. Because I also have the Spicy Brain and Chemicals Morguefile, MORGUEFILE.com is another good place to look. It's one I haven't used in a while, but when I first started, it was the website I started with. And that's just the nature of the game of the less money you pay up front, the more work you have to put in to make the resource really work for you. The advantage, of course, is that if you're going to be doing this for a while, if this is a strategy you're going to end up using a lot, and if you make a lot of things, this is a resource that you're going to be able to come back to time and time and time again, and you can bookmark creators. Usually you can see when they put up new art, and you can decide whether or not you want to use that in your archives. For folks out there who are also making videos, Pixabay in particular has the advantage. They also have sound effects, they have music, they have video clips. Lots of things that I've ended up using in other videos on the channel, I have gotten from there. So I highly recommend doing that because it is far better for you to do that than it is to just go to Google image search and type something in and take a result you think looks good, because doing that can leave you open to all sorts of legal action. Whether it's a cease and desist letter from the artist whose work you took without checking to be sure it was available to use, whether it's ending up with an image that is actually associated with something completely foreign to what you're doing. It makes a huge headache for you if you don't check to be sure you have the right to use a thing. And if you're not paying for it, as you do with commissions or with stock art, you need some kind of legalese, which is what makes these sites great, because they have an agreement. All the art that's put up on the site comes with an agreement saying that you have the right to use this image. So as long as you can check the website and just mark where you got your particular art pieces from, you should be in the clear as far as that goes. There may still be problems in the future if it turns out an artist had taken a piece of art from something, or if they had used a program to create it which violated site guidelines, things like that. But in the incidents where those happens, and I'm not a lawyer, but it is my understanding that because you were operating in good faith, the issue is on them and not on you, as long as you follow along and do everything in your power to sort of undo an issue that they're using certain violating principles caused. And as a final bit for this section, I wanted to touch on it before we got to the end. The reason that I recommend these particular websites is that they are full of really good stuff. However, because of what's going on with the whole AI quote-unquote revolution, you need to be careful as to which labels a piece has, and you need to count the fingers, count the toes, count the teeth. Because a lot of so-called artists basically just generated an AI program and they just uploaded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces and didn't label them as AI. So it's important to make sure that you're not using that as much as you can. And it falls under one of those of, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but that doesn't mean just do whatever you want. It means you should try your best, but acknowledge that the system is imperfect and sometimes a thing will slip through. I've had it happen myself. I've had certain blog entries, I've had certain articles where someone pointed out a thing was probably AI generated, and then I looked at it and went, crap, I missed that. Not because I personally generated it. I have never downloaded an AI generator. I don't even know where anyone would get the programs. But because these websites have been a little slow to catch up, the AI label was not always present. So keep an eye out for that if you can, and make sure that when you do notice it, that you keep those artists out of your search. It's just a good idea to avoid going forward, not just for the ethical reasons not to use programs trained on other people's stolen artwork, but because it could leave you open to problems if it turns out that there are court cases in the future that say, because we've already seen from various court rulings that AI art cannot be copyrighted, which means that people can take art that, if you used it and it became associated with your game, now other people can just use your art free of charge without question. And it may also be, we'll get to a point where, like Amazon, for instance, has taken down a lot of products because they were made exclusively with AI. And if that trend continues, you may have put in a lot of time, effort, and energy into your game, and suddenly find that because you used a piece of art that has been deemed AI, now the whole thing has to be taken down and redone. So just save yourself the time and energy and avoid using anything that comes from those programs, and be careful when you are out there in royalty-free image archives. There's good stuff there, but it's, as with mushroom foraging, just because it looks really good doesn't mean you should put it in your mouth right away. Take some time, look at it, see where the artist came from, check their archive, and make sure you read the labels carefully. That said, it is a great way to get art at a very affordable rate, but there are dangers associated with it. So, as with the previous two options, you're going to have to weigh what works for you and what might be a risk you don't want to take, depending on how much time, energy, and money you're putting into this particular project, and what risks you do or don't want to expose yourself to. Anyway, that's my little spiel on art, how you can get various types of art for your game, and some of the resources I would recommend you use and some of the methods that have worked for me. Let me know in the comments if you have questions, if you have experiences with particular websites, or if you have archives you'd recommend, or even if you have artists that you think are really great that you want to see more from. We need all the resources we can get, and communities sharing stuff with each other is one of the best ways to get stuff for RPGs. But with that said, this is your Tabletop Mercenary, signing off. First and foremost, thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Tabletop Mercenary. If there's a question you have about being an RPG creator, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments below so I can address it in a future episode. If you want to help me keep the lights on and keep this show going, then please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and giving it a share on your own social media pages to help boost the signal. Lastly, if you really enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a tip by buying me a Ko-fi or becoming a Patreon patron at the links in the video description below. You'll find me on both sites under the name The Literary Mercenary.